Okay, we will get started with the Facilities Committee of the Whole. We'll call to order the meeting. We need to assign a chair. If it's okay with everyone, I can appoint myself as the chair. Any objections? Okay. Approval of minutes from April 29th, 2019. Man, that was a while ago. Any comments, objections, changes? Oh, go ahead, sure.
If I could just provide a little context about the meeting minutes from April 29th, 2019. That was before we engaged with a consultant that we put together a facility task force that did all the work. So this information really is outdated. It just needs to be approved. You are now the Facilities Committee of the Whole, whereas before we had a Facilities Committee. So we've actually had conversations about facilities work when Chris Arnold was here, Scott Berge, now Brandon, Darren Johnson, listing our priorities just a couple of meetings ago, kind of talked about that. So you are the facilities, the Committee of the Whole. So I just wanted to add that context so there wasn't confusion about what were these meeting minutes all about.
And good thing Cynthia's still on the board, because then Cindy wouldn't have to chase you down for a signature, so.
If I may, I actually called Dr. Brenner today and said,
Oh,
I am totally confused. Because on the last part of the agenda, or the minutes, it's all these documents that were going to be produced. And it's like, what happened? Why haven't we met? Help me remember. So
are you still confused or no?
I still find it a blur,
Okay,
just for the record.
okay. Do we have a motion to approve?
I was trying to help.
Okay, Bill, is there a second? Okay, it's a blur, but you're seconding. Okay, any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 3, 2023 Projects Priority Summary. Brandon?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. We're going to do this one together here. Darren Johnson, Director of Buildings and Grounds. Just wanted to give you a quick overview here. Primarily, we wanted to give you an update on what we're kind of thinking for some of the projects for this next construction season. So giving you basically an overview of some of the uses of funding, walk through then the sources that would be associated with that, because as always, there's competition for capital. And what we'd like to walk away with here is a recommendation. As a facilities committee, what would your recommendation be to finance committee to further that conversation, and eventually back to yourself at the January 9th meeting, the whole meeting of the board. So I will let Darren walk through just a summary of those projects, and then I'll get into some of the numbers involved with those.
Again, I'm Darren Johnson. I'm Director of Buildings and Grounds. Good to see all you here. I'm going to go through some of the highlights of what we're going to be doing. This might help you out in public too a little bit. If you ever hit a talking point with somebody, it'll give you a little base knowledge of what we have going on. The first project, we had a roof collapse at Schrader Junior High that you probably all remember from like last May or so. We are actually in process right now with Travelers Insurance. They came to town from Detroit. Their assessor did, brought an engineer with from Chicago. That was last Tuesday. They looked over the damage to the building at Schrader. They seemed very positive about it. They made no guarantees about what kind of finances we're going to get out of it, but it looks positive. So that's kind of where we're at with Schrader. The guaranteed energy savings that we've been talking about with all those Lewis and Clark, Viking, Kelly, and all those schools, that's going to be starting here in late spring, early summer. The first half's going to go through the summer, and then it'll pick back up again in the summer of '24 and be completed. So that's the large air quality, air conditioning, all the lighting retrofits. That's the energy savings part of it that we're doing with ICS. Next project, Central. They've wanted a storage garage on the North 5th side of the building, about 100 North 5th, where there's a shed that we're going to build. It's going to be big enough to hold equipment. It'll keep their snow removal equipment, their walk behind, their rider. And then we've also got a Bobcat because they've got a lot of challenges there with snow removal at Central, because basically the city pushes it on the sidewalk and we push it back into the street. So it's, until it finally gets in the middle of the night, they come by with the snow blower and haul it away. So that's another project that we're working on this summer. Then I've got two motivated principals who travel a little bit, and they're down in Fargo, and they see these nice digital signs in front of the high schools down there. They're using it for announcements, and they're also using it for advertisements, so they can make a little bit of money for their schools as well. Our principals, we're going to be meeting in the near future with the actual sign maker. I would think in the next month or two, to see what the possibilities are. So we're looking at putting up a digital sign at Central and at Red River. They'll both be a little different. I think the one at Central might go on the side of the building. The one at Red River will be on 17th is the plan. Then a little bit of safety and security. We got a key fob upgrade. We use key fobs to get in security through our doors. The system is starting to get aged. It's starting to have a few problems. Between my door guy talking to me about it, who's very knowledgeable, and our IT department, they said it's not completely broken, but it's going to continue to deteriorate. So we'll be working on a key fob system this summer. When the kids get out of the school system, it'll make it a lot easier for the guys to go in and get that work done. So that'll be happening in the summertime as well. Then we've got Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's going to have an air quality project. This is Casey. He's actually one of our architect that is assisting with that in case you have any questions about it. We're doing the same thing there. We're doing a lighting retrofit. We're giving it air conditioning. We're fixing some of the duct work. We're working on the bathrooms for the little people to make them ADA compliant. And so it's a pretty good sized project that's going to be starting here. We're actually in the bidding phase right now where we've got the bids. They've been accepted. We just haven't gone any farther than that. Randall will talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. And then the last project, Cushman Field. We're looking at turf replacement this summer. Again, the bidding process has gone out. We've got the vendor chosen. They said, I learned this from our engineer that did that. They're out of Fargo, that they said, your fields are only supposed to last 8 years. Ours lasted 10. So we actually got a couple extra years out of it. So we can feel fortunate about that. We saved a few dollars anyway over the course of a couple years. Other than that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brandon. We're here to answer questions, though.
No, thank you, Darren, and we'll probably have you weigh in on some of the social or safety and security.
Sure. Oh, that too. Safety and security has not gone by the wayside. We've got things, that's the key fob project is part of that. We also have other things that I'm doing right now. We're securing up our buildings in different ways with doors and reconfiguring some things to make things safer. And just so we can all be aware, I don't know if you guys are involved with the assessment of what happened at Red River, that hoax that happened about a month ago. Things actually, even though it's a terrible thing, things went well. The notification went well, the lockdown went well as you could hope it to be for a situation like that. But it did show that our security is in place. Yes, we want to make it better, but it is in place and it's doing its job. So.
No, thank you, Darren. So just, don't go too far because we'll probably need you quite a bit through the conversation here, but wanted to give you an overview is what you can see listed here in the memo cover letter of different projects. The Excel spreadsheet I'll address directly, but you'll just kind of notice how this is outlined a little bit differently, that safety and security is almost a bucket at the bottom. And that'll be a big point of the conversation. I'm going to walk through the sources for each of these projects, and then you'll find towards the end of the conversation is where kind of the contest of capital will take place, just for a few different priorities that we've discussed, and that's where we'd like to get your recommendation. So, as Darren mentioned, with Schrader Middle School, very confident response from our insurance agent. So we had initially just shored up the roof, so we haven't lost any classroom square footage, and we've put off a permanent fix until next year. So it's settled right now. But when the travelers came out, they were confident. They send $100,000 ahead of their visit even. And they're looking at a possible replacement of $317,000, and there could be some architectural and engineering fees associated, so we're getting closer to $400,000. But there is a possibility that they would make larger structural change to that roof, as it may not be up to code as it was when it was initially designed and built. So that will, fortunately, with that project, come with it a source of those dollars, not just the use. So we're happy to see that. Cushman Track and Field, as we kind of mentioned there too already, it's a replacement, it's a maintenance effort there, and we're so lucky to have Alture's sponsorship associated with that project. And we've been working with them. Their commitment was $75,000 a year over 10 years, or $30,000, excuse me, for 10 years. And we're asking if we couldn't get that on day one of that project so we can help offset the cost of that capital early. Guaranteed energy savings, I'll just hold for a second and do a couple of these smaller ones here. Central Shed, as Darren mentioned, that's something that we would be funding, but it's a really great activity. That's something the students build alongside the instructors, but also we have some cooperation from the private sector too. So it's a really great win-win project. We hoped to get to it even a little bit sooner, but it just kind of got pushed back on the schedule here. So we'll be hitting that this summer. And then the signs, Darren already mentioned how there's actually business sponsorship offset. And what is being requested of the building fund in this case is to, well, probably the general fund, to tell you the truth, would be more of a financing mechanism for those PTOs. So as those sponsorships come in, it would repay the initial investment. So where things get to be a little bit more of a conversation is between guaranteed energy savings, Ben Franklin project, and safety and security. So some of the initial dollars set aside for these buckets came from the additional 10 mills that was anticipated to procure or bring up to $2.5 million in proceeds annually. As you'll recall, the decision made at the board level was to bond $1 million of those proceeds to bring that money ahead. We were optimistic to get nearly $17 million. We ended up with the markets, about $13.8 million came in off of that bond sale. At 13.8, we were trying to fit a number of projects in, guaranteed energy savings. The Ben Franklin wasn't a part of that conversation. Those have been ESSER dollars, but then safety and security. So we're looking at, yes, air conditioning, but air quality and safety and security coming out of that bond proceed. You have weighed in on the guaranteed energy savings program, and that has taken from the 13.8, 11.4. There's a few other dollars involved, and I'd be happy to explain the 17 million number you'll see on that chart. But from our building fund, 11.4 was taken. So that left about $2.4 million that the board at the time had kind of set aside for that bucket of safety and security. Not quite sure what that looked like. We talked about different strategies like mass notification, but really hadn't come forward. You did weigh in on a consent to move forward with mass notification. But we've been so lucky with Darren coming into the district, his previous nearly 20 years working in a very relevant field. And actually we're excited with our new safety and security manager, Brian Robbins, who's actually serving as an SRO. Darren has been able to dig in. And what we found where the initial focus on mass notification came from was the Department of Homeland Security investigation that took place from February 2018 to May 2019. And in there lay a number of different priorities, including mass notification. It also included vestibules within entrapment areas. So when a person entering, they can make it through the first set of doors, but not the second set of doors without first discussing and meeting with somebody. In that vision, we could bring the push-to-talk buttons that are on the outside of the buildings into that entrapment area. And a whole lot of other even bigger ideas, such as relocating central offices to the exterior of the building. So it's been with Darren's eye that we really wanted to take a closer look here. Now, at the same time, the Ben Franklin project, the HVAC and air quality, I don't know what we anticipated for an original bid, but we had $3.8 million of ESSER set aside for that. Now that we've bid the project, it's come in at $5.8 million. So it's a $2 million gap. And when considering what we might do to address that gap, we did look at the balance of those building funds from the initial bond on that mill levy. So from the 2.4, you could consider taking $2 million to complete whole that project. And we'll work with Finance Committee to work through all those, but I want to demonstrate that there's a little bit of a contest for capital here. Now, as Darren and I have talked plenty about this, so even as he said, this is, it's in a lot of ways, a commitment to safety and security. It's not a pullback on that budget. We were reflecting on those survey results too, and that showed strong public support. That showed strong public support for a question of $18 million without a lot of tangible strategies, so you'd have to work through that. But there was strong public support. Furthermore, we know that there is another avenue, even with voters' approval by a simple majority, not what would be 60% on that referendum question. You could approve 5 mills annually for up to 5 years, which would produce, with today's numbers, estimated 6.7 million. So I don't mean to lose you in the numbers. I mean to articulate that it's a question for, one, project resources and how we address a number of different priorities, but two, how seriously would you like us to be planning for and addressing safety and security? Darren talked about how we are in a good position, and we've actually seen that with tested on that hoax at Red River. There are other, types of safety and security concerns for sure, but I believe we have a very good team member and team with Brian Robbins coming too to have some very experienced eyes on that question. But it's a little bit of how much do we want to address the safety and security. So maybe my closing comment here would note, currently in this scenario on paper, $864, almost $65,000 is set aside for safety and security. The way I came to that number is a simple balance on the revenue and expenses for this building fund. So note, there's a couple of different sources here, but none of them are general fund. Outside of that asterisk I slipped in about those PTO signs, but none of them impacting general fund. So this is still maintaining the board's priority of getting to 15%. So that is maintained, and this is suggesting that we could even now spend up to $865,000 on safety and security for immediate needs, which we're prepared to talk about what those could include as well. So it's a lot there. It's probably worth stopping at that point, but we do have Casey Hutton, as mentioned, from EAPC, as well as Darren Johnson and myself to kind of walk through what we might be thinking.
Any questions or comments from board members? We'll do Bill and then Cynthia.
Well, I would start. I think we're committed to the energy savings in the Ben Franklin project. I think we've committed that already. I do, whether we haven't voted totally on it, but I think we're committed towards that. I think we're also committed towards the safety and security, but I don't think it all has to be done at one time. I think we can gradually, with your expertise and with the people we're working on, make our buildings secure and yet continue to make them more secure in the future. I love the idea of having all of our elementary schools have the double doors coming in, and I know there's some schools that were built identical, and I'm thinking Ben Franklin, Lake Agassiz, Kelly, that would be very simple to put the double, not simple, but a lot cheaper to put the double doors in. The question
Absolutely.
marks will be when you hit a Winship, when you hit a Wilder, where you have different entrance, but we do now have the push button system that secures the buildings as we are. And our middle schools and our high schools all have the resource officer within the building, which makes them a lot more secure than they have in the past. So I like the idea of getting the air quality and getting that stuff done as we promised, and in working on our safety and security as we move forward. And what I had meant before when I talked about the bond, we go after Valley Middle School and add a bond, maybe out of that 18 million, maybe we only need to ask for 8 million. That really gets a huge amount of stuff done. That's, in my mind, that's where I'm comfortable kind of sliding towards a bond issue with, so.
Yeah, see, I think we can be creative with a lot of those schools. Central, I've actually got a couple of plans that were drawn up. Chris Arnold, prior to me, he had somebody drop a few plans. I don't know if it was you. No, that wasn't you. Sorry about that. But one of the other engineers, so I have plans, and there's one for Central, and this was 4 years ago, and it was like almost $3 million. So that's a lot of money for one school. Now, I'm gonna put that one at 4, maybe 5 million, if you use that plan. We can be creative with a lot of things, though, too, to create vestibules. We don't have, we can take things, tone things down, but still be effective, I believe. And like you said, those schools, I noticed that right away. In fact, you got brick on some of the walls. I mean, that's great. That's great protection already in that vestibule area, so.
I also, when I spoke at Winship for their education day, and just for the record, Betsy is my niece, and when she told the students that I was related, they all thought I was her grandfather, so we'll leave it at that point. But I look at Winship and to be creative, where the doorways come out into that school. You go into that hallway, and the kindergarten door comes right into that hallway.
Yeah.
There's ways with your knowledge to come out another location that would secure those kids away from a separate door that would go there. So I think there's ways to do that and still make a lot of our buildings very secure.
Sure, and one of the other things they talked was that when I was looking through the DHS, he went through and he did every school. He went to every one of our schools, and he did an independent survey, this Department of Homeland Security agent that came here, and he liked, and I liked the same things. It just, coincidentally, I don't know if I gleaned it in a class in the past, but a vestibule to slow people down, so you have to talk to them. You stop them from entering the building, but then you put a transactional window. We don't have it at our banks here, but pretend you're in a big city with a transactional window. It's much easier to judge someone when you're talking to them face to face, rather than on a push to talk or they just wander in. So a lot of the ideas he had, I thought were great, right on point, and I think we can use some of that along with some common sense too. We don't need to spend, I think we can do a lot at Central without spending $5 million. So.
Cynthia?
So I just want to clarify what we are voting on tonight. Like it says, administrative recommendation is to use up to this 650,000 to address any immediate safety and security needs. Are we talking about approving some of these other things? So I don't know if I am just the only one, but I hadn't heard anything about signs at Central and Red River in the past, or the Central shed. Not that I'm opposed to that, but based on some comments that we've had with the Finance Committee, in listening to the architects on that team, we hear about the terrible ventilation at Lewis and Clark. There are issues with Winship in terms of building structure that I have great concerns about. And, they're not on any kind of list.
No, but I can let you in on a little insight on that. We're trying to explore possible grant process to work. I was just over there the other day, and yeah, the boards are rotting around the base of the building, and paint's coming off. And we're not forgotten. Just because it's not on the list tonight, it's not forgotten.
So first of all, my first question, I know I said a lot. What are we really concerned about tonight? Just the safety and security? Because I think we need to also talk about these signs at Central and Red River. We do have a policy now on advertising that I'm sure would be implemented in terms of what would go on those signs. But I just need a little more context there.
No, thank you, Dr. Schaub. I think that's a good point. And in retrospect here, I could have articulated the administrative recommendation a little more. So first and foremost, as a committee, we're just looking for that recommendation for future committee of finance and also the board. So no hard and fast decisions tonight. We're looking for some direction. And with their point, we could have been a little more broad about some of the directions we're going in here. The most pressing point of the conversation is that we have open bids on both Cushman and on the Ben Franklin project, and those will expire. And so the timeline we're on is whether or not we can be inclusive of, the escalation on that Ben Franklin project. Can we go forward with that? Come January 9th, we would need an approval, Because the bids are only good for, if we require a date 15th or something thereafter,
12th, some,
13th.
13th?
And so that is the more pressing. We tried to provide some context here, so I think I misled you on my administrative recommendation as far as approval go, but we're looking for that direction, and if you say, let's bring those signs back and have a bigger conversation, I think that's entirely appropriate.
So just to clarify, on page 2 of the Facilities Committee, which is page 4 of the Facilities Committee agenda, the last paragraph says for this first item that we're discussing that the administrative recommendation is to use the 864,000. So are we, I think to Cynthia's point, are we more so concerned with moving that piece forward, or should it have been broader for this first
Yeah.
piece?
No, very, very fair point, and I think it should have been broader.
Okay.
In that, that may be conclusion of the decisions yet tonight.
Sure.
You know, that may be the remaining dollar amount for that priority.
Okay.
And my phrasing, I kind of put it a little differently, but I think I'm open to any recommendation or direction you'd like to give us.
Okay. Dr. Brenner, did you have something?
No, when Brandon and I have visited, it was, we weren't looking for a actionable item on the safety and security piece and moving that money. We just wanted some direction. Are you comfortable with that? Because we've talked about the importance and the relevance of that. Are you comfortable, to Mr. Palmasino's comment, that we move that to the Ben Franklin project so we can complete that, knowing fully well that second question on the referendum sometime in the spring of 2023 will address safety and security, whether it's phased in or done in totality, however the board would like to move forward.
And also, just to offer to the board with Casey here, you know, we could, if you wanted to hear more about that project, there are some pressing issues there, and I'd like you to know that those guys, when asked, did do the due diligence of looking at the project scope when those numbers first came in. We said, well, could we bring that down at all? And I don't know if you wanted to offer the perspective as to how we tried to cost control on that, but where the administrative recommendation, well, you have a couple options there. Maybe Mr. Hutton would want to make those known to you.
Can I ask this project, you're talking about safety and security now, not Ben Franklin?
I apologize for the confusion tonight. This is Ben Franklin. So this is about enabling the building for air conditioning. It's also very much about air quality control, air quality. And then there's also a couple of carpentry pieces.
So the main project that we're looking at with Ben Franklin is if you're familiar with that school at all, it was built in sort of 3 different pieces, and 2 of them were the older sections, and then there's one that I want to say was like around late 60s or 70s maybe that got added on. And so there's a little bit of 2 different things that are happening there, but essentially the original 2 portions of the building, the heating systems are kind of on their last legs. The heating system for the newer portion is really, really close. So we kind of looked at this project as correcting all of that in one, but there are options where that newer portion could last a little longer. It's always a risk nowadays, you know, because you never want anything down. The new system that we're looking at adds some redundancy so that we do have some ability if something were to fail or need to be replaced, you know, we could counter that and provide some redundancy through the entire school. The other big things that are getting added are ventilation. Again, the newer part has better ventilation, but it's still not up to current codes. I mean, if you go over to Discovery, there's a lot better ventilation in that building than there is in this one. Air conditioning, there's, again, some of that in the newer portion of the building, and I use that term a little loosely because it's not that new. But that's, again, it's decent in that space, but it's not up to current standards. So none in the older portions, a little bit in the newer portion. But again, the newer portion could get kicked down the road a little bit with lesser risk. The last things we had in here, there's fire protection, which there's not a lot of the older schools were ever built with fire protection. That is a current code requirement for any school to have. So we were adding that in. And then we are also updating the restrooms in some of the kindergarten classrooms. Right now, the ones that are built there, they're not accessible at all. The sinks are on the outside of the toilet space, and so there's kind of some sanitation concerns there as well. And then the last piece was just some updated finishes and things that, while we're doing all these other renovations and updates, we would modify some of the finishes, the flooring, redo some paint, and sort of accommodate while we're in there, make it look a little nicer.
It's hard to, I mean, it's hard to not replace things when you see that they're wrong, because, am I wrong, in the new section, the newer section, they fabricated some sort of a fiberboard and tried and made it into duct. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's being changed out, correct?
Yeah, there were some creative things done there at the time.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, I think Cynthia, at this time, I think we need to continue to move forward on the Ben Franklin project as is. And the reason is that if we would miss the January 9th acceptance of that bid, and it would run out, the next bid would probably be for another 500 to 600,000, just the way things are going. And we also, majority of that money is ESSER 3 money, is 4 million. So the energy savings money and the Ben Franklin money, I think we've already have talked about, and we're with Ben Franklin moving forward. I do agree with Cynthia on the 2 signs. I think there's some more creative ways to get those done. And I think we can, kind of look at that with the principals, because I think if you could work with a vendor who will come and install the sign, you can use it, and they will sell the advertising on it. They get the money from the advertising, but yet you'll get what you want in front of that. Now, I know principals may lose some money on the deal for their school, but it would be a lot cheaper for us down the road to do it that way, because when at the Park District, we looked at Apollo Park, and we were going to do the same thing with electronics, that they would come in, put in the sign, we could put all the information we want on the sign, they would just sell the advertising. You can limit what advertising you want to put on that, and then that would take care of the signs. We can do it, but I think it's just a little more research on those 2 items, so.
Yeah, and that was in the infancy too. I was just approached by Mr. Harrison. I mean, this was recent that it was brought to our attention. So it's still, even they said they did have a phone call into one of the sign companies in town here, but it was just kind of a general estimate that the sign would cost like $60,000. That's all it was, and it was a verbal. It hasn't really taken off yet, so it's still early in that project.
I agree with the signs. I think, certainly to see them on the list at 180,000, I think there's more to explore. I'm curious about the sources of funding under the Child Nutrition Fund. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Guaranteed Energy Savings Program. So there's a couple of different monies at play with that. So you actually have the building fund contributions, you have the anticipated savings amount of the new envelope improvements, boiler improvements, and efficiencies. So the savings associated with that. And then even those bids came in a little bit higher than what we were expecting, if you recall at the time. And so what we looked at is, can we use child nutrition funds for those spaces associated with the students? We looked at gyms, if they double as lunchrooms. We looked at kitchen spaces. We got legal counsel that we could not do the gyms, even if they were doubling as lunchrooms, but we could with some of the air handling units above the kitchens and the pieces associated with just the kitchens, we could do that. So when we did go to bid, we actually asked that to be carved out, so we knew very specifically which portions of the project could be legally covered by child nutrition funds. And to your earlier question, Dr. Schaub, Lewis and Clark is one of the schools being addressed for the air quality and the air handling exchange through the Guaranteed Energy Savings Program.
Other questions or comments? Dr. Brenner?
I just want to add, just so the board doesn't lose sight, just because we're talking about these projects tonight, that doesn't mean that the other projects that you approved a couple of meetings ago, and just to refresh your memory, we talked about HVAC projects at Viking, Lewis and Clark, and Kelly, and those are still on the docket to get done. So I just didn't want people to leave here thinking everything changed. That has not changed. Those are priority projects for us.
Go ahead.
What's the status of the central shed? That sounds like it's in progress.
The set, no ground has been broken. I've got plans in my office, again, that I inherited, that I had to find, but it appears as though all the logistics have been worked out. They've got the spot they wanted on North Fifth. It's just, I don't believe any materials or anything has been bought at this point in time. So it's a concept that's ready to go, but we don't have it all lined up. We don't have the materials or anything like that. So it's a ways out as well.
And Dr. Schaub, you might be noticing a building on site at Central. I think that CTE program will build a shed each and every year. And this year, they anticipated it to be this shed that they wouldn't send elsewhere, but they would use right on site there. But there was actually some site preparation, some concrete that needed to be taken out, and it butted right up against school start. I've been here like 2 days longer than Darren, so I caught a little bit of this. But
I think I saw the print. I think it's 3 feet away from the school. But yeah, there's just enough room there.
And so once school was starting, they just said, okay, we got to hold a year. So we have those commitments to do the project, including from the private sector participation. Scott Fournier integrated steel. So it'll be actually a unique design with light gauge steel studs, not just the wood. It's a great opportunity, but we just had to be put on hold for about a year.
That's exactly what I was thinking about, because they build those wooden sheds every year and then sell it. So this time they would build it, and then they would never have that space again to build sheds in the future.
It's actually where, if you're looking, you got the corridor, the alleyway that people deliver at Central right there. They're usually building the sheds to the left. This is going to be to the right, up against about 3 feet off the building. It's 22 by 28 feet. This is how big the structure is. But you're right, it is going to limit them on some room there for industrial technology teachers' pickups. You may not be able to park there, so.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, what are they doing now with equipment? Are they hauling it? Are they transporting equipment back and forth?
I'm sorry. That's where my guys right now, what happens when there's snow, which could be coming right now, my guys come. We've got a bunch of young go-getters, which is great this year, since my lead guy is still at home with a bad knee. He had a knee surgery, but they start here, and they basically take 2 arcs across the city, and they meet, usually on the north end somewhere, Lake Agassiz or Central, and they all work to get it. They clear it, but we don't have equipment for the janitorial staff after they leave, after my guys come home, go to sleep or whatever. At Red River, we've got that shed at the north end of the football field. Well, there's a tool cat in there, a bobcat, that they can use to clear their snow. Say if somebody gets plowed in, the city comes by and plows it in. Right now, we have to go back to Central when they call. We just keep running back there. If they had their own tool shed or their shed with a tool cat in it, it would eliminate a lot of issues. So, I mean, we have this nice equipment, but the majority of it's in the back garage here. If we could spread it out, it'd get more use. It would be more effective.
And every time you run back to Central, a school waits on another part of town that you can't get to because you have to run back.
That's
and take
correct,
care
and
of that.
I wasn't joking. When the city comes by, they
Well,
push it on the
I can
sidewalk,
imagine.
and we push it back. So we got to win that war. So
Just a reminder that the Finance Committee is meeting Thursday, so I think the district is just looking for this information presented, certainly any thoughts, but a recommendation to take this information back, and then Finance Committee will discuss. Go ahead.
One more, is a Cushman track in field, that's just replacing the turf and replacing the track.
it's replacing the turf and
And repairing.
resurfacing the track
Okay,
with new
with it.
stripes. They're going to stripe it, and they've got some sort of a clear coat that I'm not an expert in it, but they're going to resurface and restripe. But they're not going to replace the track, no.
Yeah, and I think that's been, turf out there has been a great success for soccer, football, everybody using it, and I think we need to keep it updated because it is getting worn. I know they've talking to Mike Kramer out there. He's been doing a lot of patching and gluing and holding it together.
Yeah, I think we did well. I mean, if it's anticipated 8 years of life, we got 10. I don't think that's terrible, so.
Other discussion points, items, questions? Go ahead.
Darren, in referencing Schrader, is it just the roof repair? But wasn't there a couple of classrooms that were disturbed by that roof as well? And will that be a part of the insurance repair?
The actual classroom, I'm sorry, I'm old school. I would call it the home ec class is where the main damage happened. We have a steel beam that's being held up by 2 pipes. The actual classroom's usable. The kids are in it right now. Ms. Bryan, I believe it is. It's her classroom, and she's teaching away. She left when we were there for a little while, but yeah, it's been usable. So we've been lucky in that respect, and it's been deemed safe as well, for now.
Is that a part of the repair that you're looking at, though? If it's deemed safe, is that okay? Or do you continue, will they get in there and go, this needs to be fixed too? I know you have no way of predicting that, but right now, the $400,000 is just for the roof. Is that correct?
It's for the structural beams inside the ceiling grid. There's tile up there. There's really no physical damage to the classroom itself that I've found. And I've been over there quite a few times. This is all roof, and then your rafter or your metal beams or rafters are bent. They're failing up there from the weight of the snow and the water. But the actual classroom itself, it's in good shape.
Other questions or comments?
I think we're comfortable with the direction that you might want us to go, and we'll bring that forward to finance and then bring it back to the full board, and then at that point, it would be an actionable item.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to item 4, DPI submissions related to upgrades at Cushman Field.
So thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I apologize again for the vague recommendation there when I was writing those. These documents are required by Century Code when projects meet certain thresholds. It's articulated in the memo here. This would help us get us in a position to be compliant with state requirements should these projects move forward. I don't think that this would bind us in any way should we make future decisions at whether it be Finance Committee or at the January 9th committee. So what I'm requesting today is to approve these documents on the next 2 agenda items just to stay on our timeline. So administrative recommendation on this first project of Cushman is to recommend to the school board approval of the attachments. That's the FSN 52304 and 52813.
Any questions or comments about this item? Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
That was very enthusiastic. Motion by Dave, second by Bill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you for keeping us lively, Dave. Next item, DPI submissions related to upgrades at Ben Franklin Elementary School.
Thank you very much. Again, these are the similar documents. The only thing that you'll notice change from the previous agenda item is that there'd be federal dollars associated in this project, which would require an additional piece of paperwork going to the Department of Public Instruction. So administrative recommendations to recommend to the school board approval of the attachments, the FSN 52304, 52813, and 61974.
Any questions? Comments? Okay. Motion by Dr. Shab. Bill seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same side. Motion carries. And we are now adjourned.